erwähnt, in der Facebook-Veranstaltung die Diskussion auf Englisch stattfinden wird. Nur kurz vorab, die Diskussion wird aufgezeichnet und später auch gepostet. Das heißt, ihr könnt sie euch später auch noch anschauen auf unseren Social-Media-Profilen. Perfect. I'm switching to English now. Dear Lydia, Carlo, and Pierre, thank you so much for coming today. It's an honor to have you here. Like we talked already before, the situation would not be like it is. Probably we would not see each other in this constellation. So I'm happy to have you here. Just to introduce the three of you, so Lydia is the president of the Youth of the European People's Party. She's the first female president, and she's also a member of the European Parliament from Portugal. So Lydia, thank you very much for joining us. So then Carlo Angrisano is the international secretary of our sisters party in Spain, and also the president of European Democrat Students. For the ones who don't know exactly what they're doing, that's like Aktionsgemeinschaft on the European level. And then we have Pierre-Antoine Denis, who is joining from London, who is working for the BBC World News and who is a TV moderator and a reporter. So I would say we start with the questions. At first, Lydia, I would like to ask you, like we spoke already, in Austria, shops have reopened and the restaurants and bars are reopening in 1 week. How is the situation in Portugal, in your home country?
Well, Portugal, as of last Monday, there's been a gradual lifting of the measures of confinement for the past 2 months, nearly 2 months. So shops are now opening up to a certain dimension. The bigger shops are not opening already. It's like in phases. Restaurants as well, but still with some limitations. Particularly, there's a big incentive for restaurants to keep working on more on takeaway rather than operations on in the physical restaurants. Public transport as well. People now are allowed to commute between different districts, because before it was not possible. Like if you wanted to go, let's say, from Lisbon to Porto or to any other city in Portugal, you would need an authorization, a special authorization. So this is going to happen in the coming weeks, the full de-confinement, let's say. But what people feel is that there's a lot of fear of going back to normal. Also on the situation with the borders, well, Spain has been much more affected with coronavirus following Italy, and then it was Spain. We share the border, and so far it's going to be until the next week only they will start discussing about the opening of the border. Of course, the flow of goods can still is still working with these green lanes, but for people's mobility is still very limited. So it's upon authorization that people can go to Spain or come to Portugal, which sometimes it's a bit complicated because there's a lot of people that work on either one side or the other of the border. So it's been a little bit of a struggle there. So this is basically the situation, and in Portugal, I would say that people are very afraid of the coming months because there will be summer, and southern countries are particularly warm during these months, and usually people tend to go to the beach, to fresher places. So there's now discussions on how to impose certain limitations on the access to beaches. There's discussions about putting military and also the use of drones in beaches. So this is quite a strange time because it also brings a lot of unclarity or uncertainty on the civil liberties, let's say. So it's quite it's still a new world to be discovered. But so far, it's the situation in Portugal.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Carlo, I would like to ask you the same question. how's the situation in your home country, Spain, and how are you experiencing the situation in Belgium? Because you told me that you're there since it started. How is everything?
First of all, thank you so much, dear Julia. Vielen Dank. It's really an honor to share this very special day. It's Europe's Day, and sharing it with the young JVP of Vienna is really something special, since EDS was founded in Vienna in 1961, and we are really proud of our connection to this beautiful city that I hope I will be able to travel to very, very soon. Regarding the a bit less regarding the side that is a bit more sad of the whole situation in my country, and Lydia knows it well, and we passed a resolution in the Council of JEP. The situation is actually pretty bad, not only because of the rate of death that is way too high. We have the highest rate of deaths per million inhabitants in the world, at least at the time with the available data. And it was something that it was absolutely, it was perfectly avoidable from the side of the government. They didn't took the right measures, and they actually held a gigantic demonstration on the 8th of March with about 200,000 people in the streets of Madrid, when we had already some hundreds of cases in Spain, and it was pretty obvious that there was a lockdown going on in Italy, and that we would soon be facing a similar situation. The government had to declare, we have a socialist government with a vice president that comes from the Communist Party Podemos, and they declared a state of alarm, which gives them some extra powers, and they have actually centralized all the regional powers and the powers that effectively are on the health issues, but they're also using these times to pass some very important laws, like reform of the secret services to give more intelligence information to the Communist Party. Very, very serious things. They tried to apply some state censorship to close and shut down some of the biggest media outlets. So there was really a political attack going on while we were facing this unprecedented crisis of coronavirus. And this was something very scary. Our parliament was shut for a month, something that shouldn't happen. Even if we have a state of emergency, we should be able to maintain our checks and balances, and this is how democracy works. So we are experiencing in Spain very strange times right now, because we are facing a double threat. We are facing the threat of coronavirus, and we are facing the threat of a very dangerous government that was not even capable of buying enough masks for our medical doctors. Spain is the country in the world with more medical personnel affected by coronavirus, contagious by this disease, and we don't know exactly how many medical doctors have died. And this is terrible. I have to say that I want to share this personal note. My mother is a medical doctor, and she got coronavirus. She lost many friends in the battle for against coronavirus, and the government is not even recognizing national mourning for all of these heroes of our coronavirus times. So I have to say that I am very pessimistic regarding Spain. I don't know where we are going right now. And then, of course, having to witness all of this from Brussels is not easy. I feel European. I work for a European organization, but of course, my home country is my home country. And seeing that everything is going south while I am abroad and I don't have the possibility to go back home is a bit frustrating at times. But of course, I have to say I'm really lucky. I also have the possibility to keep running the EDS office here, also Lydia. We are next door. So we are lucky enough to work on our passion, that is politics and defending our values. But definitely I would love to be in my hometown to defend from there, from from the front line of this enormous battle.
Thank you, Carlo. That's really shocking to hear. Like you always hear it on the news, but then hearing from somebody who actually is experiencing that, or family is experiencing that, that's really bringing it back again to the mind. So Pierre, you are French and you are living in the UK. What can you tell us about the situation in your home country in France, and also about the UK? And are you happy that your Prime Minister finally changed his mind and his strategy from herd immunity to total shutdown? How is it working in the UK?
So I'll start with my home country, France, and I think that I can join Carlo when he says that there were mistakes, or at least decisions being taken very late. Shutdown was not. Lockdown was not in place when Italy started its own lockdown as well. But the situation is evolving in France. Normally, on Monday, the deconfinement should be starting. It's been more than 2 weeks now that every day there are less and less numbers in intensive care. So we should start seeing people children going to school on Monday, shops being reopened. So obviously it's a lot of uncertainty starting on Monday in France, but the government also said that more tests will be available. So we're talking about several 100,000 tests per day in France. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see if we'll be able to contain a potential second wave in France. At least the population now, and I think is the same across Europe and across the world, we're more we feel this threat more seriously than we were at the beginning of March, and we know what can come to us. So, and by hearing stories like your one, Carlo, I think people now understand that it's serious, and we're not talking about a simple flu, which makes me link to what we were saying about the UK and Boris Johnson saying that he was shaking hands with people in the hospitals at the beginning of March, and then he ended up having the coronavirus. So I think now, especially here in the UK, people have realized that it's very serious, and we're not talking about a simple flu. The government has said, the science has changed since the beginning. We know more about the virus. So lockdown is in place as well here in London, where I am, and across the UK. Tomorrow evening, Boris Johnson should announce the easing of some lockdown, but we'll come back to it. But it's even difficult here in the UK to have a common answer with the rest of the countries within the United Kingdom. They can't manage to have a common answer with Scotland and with Wales and with Northern Ireland, which could put into context how difficult it could be to have a whole European answer. But so yeah, we'll see. And changing the strategy from herd immunity to a complete lockdown was obvious when we realized that the hospital capacities were not there, and the country was not ready to fight such virus with herd immunity like Sweden is doing, for instance. It's not perfect, but at least they've got the hospital capacities to have this herd immunity, which here in the UK we've seen it's not possible. So I think he was forced to move to shut down, and especially when he is the one having the coronavirus.
Thank you so much, guys, for the explanation. It's so weird to hear all of that. And I think it's important to hear it again because, as I told you, in Austria, the situation got better. And now that it got better, many people underestimate how fast it could change again and that we still have to take care.
Julia, may I just add something for in this brief introduction on the current situation on coronavirus? I think it is a big... it is still a big challenge, and it might be like there was the expectation that eventually the coronavirus would take a slower pace in spread during summer or during spring summer, but it seems, and there are some projections saying that it won't happen that way, which means that all the measures that are lifted will have to be compensated by people's attitude on how they will cope with this new reality. Because we are risking, and I've been taking part in several meetings, and since I'm also a member of the ENVI committee, which also takes care not only about the environment, but also public health. And yesterday we were discussing about the possibility of a second wave of the coronavirus hitting already Europe potentially during the summer, which can be harsher than the one that we've been facing until now. So I think it will a lot depend not only on the governments, but also on how governments communicate to people, and then the attitudes that people will take from now on in small activities like going for shopping or gathering some friends at home, these kind of things.
Thank you for sharing that information with us, because hearing now that the second wave could even be worse should really make us all feel cautious to not underestimate the situation.
Yeah. It is not to scare, it's just to, inform and be prepared.
Yeah, that's really important, because like I told you here, this life is starting to normalize again, and many people think, okay, everything is open, so everything is normal, but actually it's not, and we're still in a global crisis. Bringing me back to the European Union, since it's Europe Day, and we don't want to discuss only negative things, but also learn of the crisis we are in right now. Carlo, you're the president of an international student organization. What is the EDS doing currently, and what is the job of a European organization during a crisis?
That is a very good question, actually. Of course, I believe that the first phase was similar for everyone, for your organization, for YEB, for all of us. It was the challenge of how are we going to work in these coronavirus times. At first, the confinement, I believe that was a shocking measure for all of us. And of course, there was a first moment where our main activity was actually suspending our events and activities. So it was a frustrating time, and it was a bit a time of shock, and we missed a bit our coordination, and I have to be honest. But then immediately we started connecting again. We started discovering these digital tools that now allow us to have this wonderful conference, and this allowed our team to be together, to work more. I have to say that normally a bureau of an organization like EDS doesn't meet more than once per month, and we are currently meeting once per week. We are increasing our work, and we are increasing also our policy making side. We have 5 working groups in EDS that tackle different issues: gender equality, sustainability and energy, human rights, policies for Europe, higher education, and research. These working groups that normally are more assessing the Council of EDS to develop the policies, now we're more free to develop the policies on their own. And then our role as members of the European People's Party is to transmit these policies to the party, to inform the secretariat that is responsible for the policy making. And of course, we were very supported and endorsed by the party when they started delivering the EPP dispatch, that is somehow a newsletter that is somehow replacing some of the activities of the political assembly of the EPP. So our policies and our position papers are going directly to the member parties of the EPP, and mainly our role here is to propose, to defend the student rights. There is a big issue with all the students that were on Erasmus in this time, and of course it's not fair for them that the Erasmus is taking place at their home, or that they are locked down in a city and they cannot experience what a real Erasmus experience should be. So our policies are going in that way, to defend the student rights when it comes to examination, when it comes to having a second chance at going in an Erasmus exchange next year, or as soon as coronavirus is gone. And then, of course, tackling other very important issues for the European Union, like the relocalization of manufacturing to the EU, or developing more policies towards pressing issues like the domestic violence. So mainly we have become policy-making institution for a while, and then we will recover, I hope, as soon as possible, our role of political actors and our role as a political network.
Thank you for telling us about your work. Now, Lydia, I would ask you, because since you're not only the president of JEP, you are also a member of the European Parliament. And so in normal times, you're spending 2 weeks in Brussels, 1 week in your home country, and 1 week in Strasbourg. And usually you spend many, many hours in packed rooms full of people, especially during the conferences. But now we are having shut down, borders are closed. How is the world of an MEP in this time when you are not able to actually meet your colleagues and travel?
Well, in the end, we can always meet virtually, which has been the biggest challenge so far. So since the parliament is the largest the biggest transnational party in the world, with 700 MEPs coming from all over Europe, and the staff and so many visitors that visit the parliament on a weekly basis. Of course, the parliament was just a matter of time that would have to adopt safety measures to contain the spread of the virus, and there were some cases were reported. So basically, the parliament is still running and is still open. But a lot of, or the majority of meetings happen online, which, as I said, brought a lot of challenges because of the difficulties of the network. Since the parliament was not, the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure of the parliament was not, as many other organizations, was not prepared to handle meetings with 180 MEPs in one shot. For example, it's the case of the EPP group. It's the size of the group, and it's very difficult to have such high number of MEPs dialing in into the same meeting, and with video and voice, audio. So it's been a real challenge. Which brings us brings me to a point that I think it's important, that we've been discussing for the past years: digital society, digital economy, and now in times that we were forced to go digital, we are still facing constraints in the development or leveraging on the infrastructure, which is still limited for the capacity that we would need. So I would say that in the first 2 weeks, when the parliament had to reevaluate how the operations in general, during 2 weeks was a little bit blurry. We were a bit like, what? How do we handle this now? It's via email, it's phone calls, but very quickly the parliament came up with different systems to hold meetings, and this is how we've been doing. Of course, the plenary sessions are still taken, are suspended from Strasbourg, since there is this situation of force majeure. The plenaries have been, they are called extraordinary plenaries in Brussels, where MEPs are discouraged to go into the hemicycle unless they have speaking time, and they will deliver a message. So we are the stay at home hashtag has been binding also for parliamentarians, but of course we will have to find a way, in a safe way, in the coming months to get back to as much normal as possible, because there's a lot of parliaments across Europe that have been adopting digital platforms to conduct their activities. But having the parliament empty, I also don't think it's a good sign for democracy. And so I think we will witness in the coming months a readaptation to this new reality. But I think, and I've been thinking about it because I was already a couple of times in the hemicycle when I had to speak, and looking around me and seeing no one, it's not a very good sign for democracy. And so safety first, of course, stay at home, but then there's also the the example that we will have to deliver for people, to trust and to make sure that trust is not put at stake between politicians and voters and citizens in general. But this is how we've been handling. So a lot of online meetings with the difficulties that the connection sometimes is bad. We cannot follow completely the reasoning of our colleagues. So we've been trying to cope with that. Sometimes it's a bit complicated. But a lot of improvements have been made in a very little time. So I'm hoping that in the future things get back to normal in a safe way. But I would leave this message that democracy can never be suspended in times of this pandemic, because I think this pandemic is also a test for democracies and authoritarian regimes, and this will be assessed in a later stage.
But is it possible to vote now? Like you said, there are no plenary sessions, but
no, there are. I said that the plenary sessions are now suspended from Strasbourg, but they are taking place. They are called extraordinary because, according to the treaties, the plenaries have to happen in Strasbourg. So we are voting electronically. For example, we in the last week there was it was adopted a new system. Before we were voting via email. And now there's a new system which still requires to sign off electronically via email. But this is how we've been doing in terms of votes.
And do you think that it will be possible to meet again before there is a vaccine or a medicament, or do you think that for this time the Parliament?
Yeah. The indication that we have is that for the next plenary, which will take place next week, there are already measures in place that allow half of the MEPs to be present physically. Of course, keeping in mind all the rules on the social distancing and wearing masks. We will be required to start wearing masks. Our temperature will be taken once we get in the parliament or when we are out. So there's going to be a close monitoring of the members and also the staff. The aim is that during summer, all the other safety measures will be put in place so that everyone can come to Brussels. But there's an additional problem to this, which is if borders are still closed, and of course members could benefit from diplomatic immunity. But for example, for peripheric countries, it's very difficult to reach Brussels. I speak from on behalf of Portugal because it's really complicated. Like there are no direct flights until now. There are some flights via Madrid and that then go through Germany. It's still it's not very certain how the travels will be back to normal. So it poses a lot of difficulties for countries that are more in the peripheral side of Europe. So until that is clarified, I think it's still quite difficult to imagine having all MEPs back in Brussels, and also accommodation. For example, several MEPs don't have a place in Brussels. They usually stay in hotels or Airbnb. So I think there's been a lot of certification from the parliament to make sure that sanitary conditions are met so that the MEPs can come and go back to their home countries. So you see, there's a lot of challenges ahead that we will have to fix in relatively short time.
That's really interesting. I'm looking forward how you're gonna solve this problem. So Pierre, the UK has left the European Union on the 31st of January this year. What did change since then? And do the British already regret that they left the EU, especially during a global crisis where you rather don't want to be on your own?
Well, I think for now they didn't have time to regret or see some changes. First, because we're still in a transition process. So as a Frenchman with all my French friends or European friends, we were now obviously applying for settled status for those who hadn't done it yet. But just a month in this new era, new dawn for Britain, and we're back in we're in a global crisis. So I think it was now obviously Brexit is, nobody talks about Brexit anymore, and I can see it from the inside, from the BBC. It's just coronavirus all the time, simply because no news are coming out of Brussels about, or from Westminster about Brexit. We're even talking about potentially delaying the exit because of the crisis, and there are discussions within Boris Johnson's government with fractions of people that are saying we should postpone because it's so special. We can't negotiate. And Linda just said it. I mean, we can't even discuss in Brussels or in Strasbourg. So we can't. It's impossible for people to travel to Brussels. So it is very complicated. And but I don't think that the British population had the time to think, well, would it have been better if we were in the EU? I don't think the question is still on the table, especially because the EU hasn't offered a global response. It was very national responses, and we can see it with lockdowns being eased in some areas and not in others. So I don't think that the view here from London is not that the European Union was a strong bloc that we could have been in there, because as the responses were all very national ones, the British opinion is a bit, we would have dealt with this issue the same way. So I really think that for now, at least, we don't see this regret or the voice coming up from the people, from the British people who wanted to remain in the EU, actually saying we would have been better if we had stayed in. But what is certain here in London and in Westminster is that there are ongoing talks and growing voices saying that the real exit on the 1st of January 2021 should actually be postponed for a while because of that crisis. It's impossible to negotiate, to have all the treaties are in place, and even for European nationals to living here in the UK to have the settled status it has become much longer to get this process done. And so to me, I really think that at some point the discussions will come back on the table, simply because for now it's all about the emergency and tackling the crisis. But in the coming weeks and months, I think, and I'm pretty sure, we will see this discussion on whether we should postpone the exit or not being back in and being discussed very, very broadly.
That's interesting. I'm curious.
Do you mind if I just comment on what Pierre just mentioned about Brexit?
Yes.
It's just to complement what you just said, Pierre. Actually, I know that there's been some talks and on the European Union side to push for the extension period to be postponed, the transition period to be postponed. But apparently, from the British side, there's really not such will, and I think it's a big problem, because there's the risks of the actual Brexit, the economic impact that will have, that combined with the pandemic, which we also know that is bringing a lot of challenges economically. Like, we are now trying to discuss a recovery plan, economic plan for Europe. So I think for the UK, eventually, it's not because we would love the UK to stay, because that's not a question, but also for a safety, to assure people that the impact will be mitigated in its fullest. It would be important, but what we know here on this side is that there's really not such will from the British side to postpone.
And if I just may, I think it really comes down to Boris Johnson's real politics of promising and offering and telling the British people, we will be out on that date, and that's a given fact. We will see, we will be out, we will have our freedom, we will be independent, and this is a discourse that it has been saying and repeating over and over again during his campaign, during the last months of 2019 and early January 2020. So I think it's all about him promising something to the British people, and unless he's forced to actually postpone the transition period and the end of the transition period, he will do it. But he will fight for that date until it's possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so basically, I think we can all agree that the situation is not perfect and that there have been many mistakes, but after all, we wouldn't be the European Union and the people we are if we would not analyze the situation and learn from the mistakes. So, Lydia, it's not the first crisis the EU is going through. And every time there is a crisis, there are certain voices who say the EU is not effective enough and is not acting in the proper way. What can we learn from this crisis, and what can the EU actually do during a situation like that?
Well, indeed, it's not the first crisis, and I think we should have learned much more from the SARS crisis back in 2003, and we eventually should be in a position that we have eventually the ECDC, the European Coordinated Disease Center, would be eventually working or operating in similar circumstances as, for example, the World Health Organization. But we would need a European health organization with shared competencies to monitor, to have to ensure that there's medical teams ready to respond to the needs of each one of the member states. So we should have learned that from the past. This pandemic is revealing our fragilities on that, our vulnerabilities, because no one asked for the virus to come to Europe, and yet it's spread equally around Europe. So definitely, this crisis is a big opportunity for Europe to discuss several things. One is, for example, on the shared competencies in health in general. Like, the EU is blamed, and in fairness to the EU, in particular to the President of the Commission, who assumed that she declared, like, I know that the EU responded late for this crisis, and it is true. But at the same time, the EU has limited competences when it comes to health policies. So it's kind of a difficult balance, because on the one hand, there's the will of trying to do more, but then they are limited by the national governments. So it's a difficult situation. But anyway, the EU indeed reacted late in the process, but reacted. And the package of measures that the President of the Commission back in the mid of March adopted for the establishment of the green lanes, for the joint procurement that was launched with the 25 member states to seek for medical equipment. It was necessary because there were big shortages of this equipment in every single country in the EU. So this is something that where we have to look for the next pandemic, or even for this one, because this pandemic is far from being over. So we have to increase our preparedness on the sanitary side, because in the single market, and if a country shuts down and the other shuts down, like in some sort of a domino effect, we will be all impacted. So this is something to discuss and put in the agenda as a priority for the next in the next months in Europe. Another thing that I think it's important to consider is then, so we were talking about the emergency measures, how to react and how to deal with the crisis, with the pandemic, and then there's the post-COVID, which is the economic recovery, because having the planet and particularly Europe closed for 2 months, of course, companies are suffering. The measures adopted were, of course, at the national level, layoffs and credit lines for small and medium-sized enterprises. But for example, for countries that are very much dependent on tourism, for example, let's say Portugal, Italy, Spain, Greece, Southern in general, but tourism impacts every country, but particularly these ones which are a bit more dependent economically on the tourism sector. Having restaurants, cafes, hotels closed, you can imagine that the impact on the for businesses in general. So this will have, and not to speak about the debt that had to be raised to face the expenses with hospitals, with the additional material necessary. So all the expenses that governments had to incur. So I think Europe is not put to a test, because we had other tests in the past, and it's a different approach, but the financial crisis showed that. And Europe was always able to find a way to find a compromise. Now we are also in the discussions for the MFF 2021-2027. But it seems like the political debate starts already somehow intoxicated, because there's always this divide between the North and the South, and then the South claiming for solidarity, but also the South has to understand that the North has, maybe they want to put solidarity first, but they also have to respond to their voters. So it's always a difficult balance to find on this. But the discussions on the MFF, for example, are always very narrow-minded on the national contributions from each member state to the budget. And perhaps, since we are, this crisis revealed many things, like how we are much more dependent on digital. So why we are not discussing a new approach, or maybe not during this crisis, but perhaps in the future, on the way to financing the MFF. For example, if we shift this debate from the national contributions, and if we discuss own resources like taxes contributing directly for the budget, maybe it's a way to, not to intoxicate the debate, saying that the North is financing the South, because this is always the big discussion, and that and it might undermine the whole concept of Europe. And I think there's this risk of some countries, and let me mention particularly Italy, for the political situation that Italy has, which is always very special, with some growing populism in the last years, and in the difficulties that it might bring if there's no European response. Now, the European response is not going to be ideal for every country, but there will be some sort of compromise. So I don't think, I don't have this negative feeling that, and I see many people saying, oh, this is the end of the EU, and no, it's not that. It's just, we will have to discuss, and we will have to find alternatives and solutions, as we've been always doing. And it's not with only one plan that we will fix the whole Europe, because there's many other things at stake. And I think the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, of course, which is, for example, the geopolitical role of the European Union in the global context, like how we're going to manage our relations, for example, with China, which, by the way, took some time to communicate to the international authorities about the spread of the virus and about the seriousness of the epidemic, which then evolved for a pandemic. And this crisis revealed that we are very dependent on strategic industries. A lot of them are based now in third countries, particularly in China. Will we want to keep being so dependent? And in case we have to face another crisis like this pandemic, will we kept vulnerable? So there's many things to consider, but I think it's far from being the end of the EU. It is an opportunity for the EU to deep its integration, as it happened in the past. And we should not be afraid of saying this, because being European does not mean that we lose our national sentiment for our home country. I usually say that I'm European and I'm Portuguese, and I don't know to be one without the other. And I think this is how our generation, the generation made in Europe, feels.
Great, thank you. So since time is passing very fast, I'm going to ask a last round of questions, and I'm asking you guys to answer very briefly so that we can still hear the questions from the audience. So, Carlo, I would like to ask you, our Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, said that in order to keep the EU alive, we need to reform it. And he said we will need a new EU treaty. Do you agree?
Well, you know, having a new EU treaty would mean to put together and to find some common ground with 27 heads of state, plus their parliaments, plus the approval of the population. We already know what happened when we tried to approve the European Constitution. I have to say that Chancellor Kurz is never short of ideas and of wonderful rhetoric. I have to say I was there on the night of the elections last October, if I recall correctly, and he's a wonderful leader. But in this case, I am not sure that what we need is actually a new treaty. There is something more pragmatic to do. For example, how the EU could have dealt better with this crisis? First of all, by achieving an economy of scale. There was something that, at least for me, was more pragmatic to do that actually the EU has started doing now, that is achieving a unique unique provider. So one only institution that is buying all the medical equipment. Of course, there are other political issues coming up, but if you achieve an economy of scale, then you wouldn't have had cases of missed solidarity, of attacks to our solidarity rules, like what happened with the masks that were going to Italy and that were stopped in the Czech Republic, or the same happened to Austria with the German masks. So there are things that we can do within the current institutions, within the current set of legal framework. Nonetheless, there are, of course, things that we can improve. For example, one very important thing for me, and I don't know how we can manage, because of course it's one of the main institutions according to our treaties, is how can we reform the council? Because from my perspective, from the perspective of EDS, the biggest the biggest failures came from the council, not from the European Commission, not from the Parliament. The Parliament is a hospital for democracy in these times, and even if we all agree on that, I believe that the Parliament, the European Parliament, the Spanish Parliament, and all across Europe, the legislator was a bit left aside from the decisions. There were extraordinary powers for executive branches, but our executive branch here in Brussels is subject to the Council. And of course, no one wants to appoint strong leaders in the Council. And this has been an ongoing question since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. So there are many things that we can improve with the institutions that we already have. And we can rethink, of course, what should be the role of the Council. And there will be the issue of Eurofederalism or not. But of course, we believe in a strong EU institutions. We believe that a true European answer would have been better, and that it was not because of the European institutions being so shocked, but it was mainly because they don't have the powers, as Lydia said. It's something related to health, security, something where the EU can only coordinate but cannot take whole decisions. And we have already saw that the EU works better as one unique entity than rather 27 or in the past 28 states. For example, the EU consular repatriation of EU citizens abroad, we had a unique consular mandate to allow 500,000 Europeans to come back home, thanks to the EU institutions. We had a lot of masks bought now by the EU institutions. We can work better if we work united, and this is the message. how can we work better? Do we need new treaties or not? That is, of course, something up to the heads of state. But from my point of view, we could improve many things within our current framework.
That's a beautiful message. Thank you so much, Carlo. I would like to start with the questions of the audience now. And the first question is from Christian. He's asking Pierre-Antoine, concerning the sports event situation in the UK, Germany is going to start their football league next week. Does the Premier League plan to start soon too, or is a cancellation like in France more likely?
So I guess for now, the original plan for now is to restart the league behind closed doors. That's for sure. There was no way fans could attend games of this season. But obviously, some players are against it, as we've seen many German players that were not particularly keen on going back to training and to play. So obviously, football is a game for where if there's no fans, it's a bit weird to play football. I think as a football fan and the one you are, Christian, I guess you understand me that if there's no fan, there's not much more sense to play football. But what they're offering instead is to do free-to-air games, so to have the games live normally on YouTube. So that anybody can watch it for free, as there's no way to go to the games. So for now, if everything sticks to plan, the league should restart at some point, probably mid-June or beginning of mid-June, end of June, with free-to-air games on digital platform, so that anybody can watch it for free.
Great, thank you. So the next question is coming from Maximilian. I would like to ask it to everyone and just ask for a brief answer. Starting with Lydia, how serious is the issue that one of the EU's biggest achievements is to open borders and now the Union has to close these borders again? Could that be a threat to the European cohesion?
No, I think if it's coordinated at the highest level, and if it's, when I say highest level, it's at the European level, we understand that this is an extraordinary situation, and it's for the safety of everyone, of every single citizen. So, and as the president of the Commission did, for example, with the establishment of the green lanes to ensure that the supply of goods and to make sure that there was no disruption in shops, in hospitals, it worked. The problem that I see is, for example, when we will have to discuss about the restoration of the mobility of people, like it's one of the fundamental freedoms of the EU, how we will be doing it in a safety way. I think people understand the extraordinary situation, and I do believe in a strong European response towards not undermining the achievements of the Schengen area. But we will have to be cautious in the next steps, not for people not to start questioning. So maybe we don't need the European Union. Like if we cannot travel, if we cannot do businesses, for example. But at the same time, we also have to see the other side of the story, which is that people know and that people fear to travel in general, to go to other countries. So this has to be coordinated at the highest level. And I'm sure, and the indication I have from the information I got access to, is that it's being discussed to make sure that there's a minimal impact in the whole concept of no borders in the Union. But I don't think it is a threat. It is a challenge, and it is due to the extraordinary times. And as soon as we can go back to normal, the better. But always in a safety way.
Carlo, what is your point of view on the question?
Well, I believe that the positioning of this question is somehow not so close to reality. And why is that? First of all, it's not the first time that Schengen is suspended at some point. Pierre remembers, I'm sure, very well when France was under constant terrorist threats, that President Macron suspended Schengen already, and it was not the first time that this happened. So it is something that is already foreseen in the Schengen Treaty. And on the other hand, is Schengen really closed right now? I don't think so. Why is that? One thing is the mobility of persons. The other thing is the mobility of goods. And honestly, here in Brussels, you know, I am half Spanish, half Italian, so I pay a lot of attention to the vegetables and to the things that I buy in the supermarket. And we keep receiving all this food that is coming from Spain, that is coming from Italy. That means that if Schengen was really closed for real, we couldn't actually be being with these vegetables arriving Brussels. Thanks to Schengen, we are dealing to this health emergency with this pandemic in a way where our borders are not closed to the mobility of goods. And this means that if there was something else in place that was not Schengen, we would have seen probably a lot of shortage in the supermarkets all around Europe, as there are just a few countries that are producing most of the food that we are eating, like France, like Italy, like Spain. Of course, having most of the European countries under lockdown and people locked at home, it's not something that will help the European project, and we have to put an end to this as soon as possible. We cannot extend this more than strictly necessary. I believe that mobility is also restrained within the countries. At least in Italy or in Spain, you cannot go from one province to the other without an authorization. So the mobility issue is something so dear to someone that believes in personal freedom that we want this to end as soon as possible, not only because of the EU, but because of the integrity of our own constitutional rights. So that is something mostly important. But I want to insist that Schengen was not suspended for the goods, and this is something absolutely important in the times of a pandemic like this one, because we still need food for to be alive, simply. So we still need to receive a lot of supplies that come from our European Union neighbors. We still need a market going on and alive, and we have it. Of course, there are some sectors that are totally dead, like tourism, but this is not meaning that Schengen is dead, and this is not really, I believe, a threat to European cohesion if we explain correctly to the European citizens that thanks to Schengen, there is no shortage in the supermarkets.
Thank you very much, Carlo. So the next question is from Jörg. Does the situation show us the limits of the European Union like we know it? And is this a chance to restart the project and make new contracts? So we basically already answered this question before, but I would like to hear also the point of view of a journalist. Pierre, what is your point of view? Like, should we make new treaties, or is it too complicated? And can we work with the treaties we have?
Well, I'm not a politician, so I think Linda and Carlo know more about what it would take to make new treaties. But what I can say about the limits that this situation might have shown about the EU is just this sadly the growing feeling that we can see in countries like for example Italy, with the deepening of this sentiment, anti-EU sentiment. This might be growing because of that situation, and in the end, this feeling of, well, the EU hasn't helped that much when we were in the midst of the crisis. So this is a stories that we've been reported in Naples, when and in the south of Italy as well, and other regions like Greece, where we've seen that actually people were actually left, the feeling that they were left alone. So I think that this the EU may have made mistake. We've talked about this, but there is a chance as well, I think, for young politicians like Linda and Carlo. I think that there is a chance for you guys to implement new ideas and to implement new projects, I think. And you'll be obviously there'll be some accountability that will need to be done. But Linda, you talked about digital projects and digital new way of approaching the EU, and I think me as outside of this political world, I think we need new contracts, or at least new way of approaching the EU, and I think new way of telling the European citizens that there's still a union, there's still something, and that is not because the union as a whole group of 27 might have been caught in this pandemic and not reacting quickly enough, but still there's still a chance, there's still an opportunity to talk and to discuss new projects. And I think the time is now, as countries across Europe are lifting their lockdowns and easing their restrictions. It's a new chance, it's a new possibility, I think, for European countries to show unity and to show that by working together as a whole group, as 27 countries, that there's a chance to actually go out of that situation quicker, and more importantly, better prepared for a future pandemic or a future crisis in general.
Thank you, Pierre. Since I'm hearing the bells of the church next to me, it's telling me that it's already 4 o'clock. Is it okay if we have one last question for you, for the three of you? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Great. The next question is from Jonathan. What do you think about traveling situation in summer, Lydia? As you already said, the state of the situation is to stay in anyone's country. What is your outlook on the very warm months, and what are your ideas to do at home in summer?
Yep, Jude, if you allow me, I will just make a very brief comment on what just Pierre mentioned, which is related to communication in general. And I've been telling in a couple of interviews that I had that the EU needs to have some sort of positive propaganda across Europe, because Europe did so much more in providing masks, for example, in providing other medical equipment that people do not feel, because there's other campaigns of propaganda going on, promoted by other jurisdictions in the world. Which then undermine the concept and the idea that people can trust in the European Union to have a strong and robust response. And this is done by very small little things, like putting a flag of the European Union on the medical equipment that is being shipped on the grounds of solidarity between one member state to the other, and also announcing it in the news, so people know that there was a shipment of equipment for another country coming on because there's a mechanism called the RescEU, the civil protection mechanism, that acquired a number of different material to give to the member states in need. So we need this. Because people, and I always give this example, when Portugal joined the European Union together with Spain in 1986, there was this. I was not born in that time, but I had the opportunity already to see several documentaries about that period, and people were like they were happy, and they were expecting a lot of from the EU, and it was. Higher salaries, new infrastructure, like modernizing the country, and in the case of both Portugal and Spain, the consolidation of the democratic regime. So we were joining a European Union that had two strong points: the economic side and the political one. And for this, in the past 30 years, it feels like, because we went through many situations like financial crisis and so on, it seems like that European dream, if you want, was somehow a little bit lost. And then we are hit by this pandemic. which for many other reasons seems that the message that the European Union did not help is widely conveyed. So we need positive European Union propaganda because Europe helped much more the countries in need than allegedly third countries that try to position themselves as the saviors of the world. So this is what I wanted to just to add to what Pierre said. In what regards the summer, there's many measures being put in place. For example, to accommodate the situation of traveling in airports, in countries in general. Greece this week announced a plan to welcome tourists in general, and it's EU tourists. Like from what I've been and from what I understand, tourists from abroad, the EU, will still have some difficulties in reaching the Union. So it's going to be, these measures are targeting Europeans in general. So there are several measures being put in place. And I think if we respect those measures and if there's assurance also on the side of the data, information about new cases that is closely monitored by all competent authorities, there's probably a way of enjoying the summer. But there's also a lot of, at least in Portugal, the government has been saying that we should eventually consider to spend the holidays in our home country and try to see different alternatives. Usually we go to the seaside, but eventually we should consider the mountains, which are also beautiful in the north of Portugal, to kind of widen the options. And I think it is the same in Austria and in France and Spain. So, but I think what I know is that these measures are being discussed and are being put in place. And once in place, they will be monitored, and eventually we'll have some assurance in case we decide to travel abroad our countries.
Great, thank you so much. That was the last question, and time has passed so fast. I would just like to thank you again for taking time today on this Saturday. I don't know how the weather is in your countries, but here it's beautiful sunshine. So thank you as well to the audience for taking time and for being here. As you said, Carlo, like your organization was founded in Vienna, and we also had the JEP Council in Vienna last year. Normally, after a discussion of the JVP, we always give a small present to our guests. Since this is not possible right now, I would be still happy if we could welcome you in Vienna when it's possible again, and to at least invite you for a drink as a little present. Also, usually after a discussion, we take a small picture in Austria. So I would just really like to ask you to smile to the camera so we can take a common picture. Perfect. So thank you very much, guys. You're doing all a great job. Pierre, please continue to tell us the world news. And Lydia, it's really great to have a young, powerful voice in the EU Parliament, and I hope you will achieve a lot. And Carlo, I'm happy if you fight for the Erasmus program, so the people who are now not able to do it will maybe be able to do it again, because it's a great experience. And thank you very much for your great work, and I hope to see you soon in Vienna or in another place. Have a beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Happy Europe Day to you.
Yeah, happy Europe Day. And after all, I think we can say that we still feel united, and I hope really much that we are going to solve the situation together, because, like you said, when one country collapses, the other one collapses as well, so we need each other. And I think that's a beautiful sentence to finish this discussion today. So happy Saturday. Also to the audience, have a great Saturday, and stay safe and healthy.
You too.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.